What's going on, guys? Brian here in the TST Industries garage. Today we're going to be performing a quick installation on this 2014 Yamaha FZ-09 behind me. As you guys could probably tell from either the title or what's sitting in front of me, that installation is going to be pertaining to the exhaust system. We're going to be removing the OEM and replacing it with this absolutely beautiful Yoshimura R-77 full stainless steel system. It's a lot lighter, sounds a lot better, and looks way, way better. I do want to mention that although I'm performing this on a 2014 Yamaha FZ-09, this installation is actually going to be the exact same if we were working on the 2017 Yamaha FZ-09 because the chassis didn't change at all. We have already verified that this exhaust bolts right up. We had one in-house, tested it out, sounded magnificent. Just wanted to let you guys know that if you're working on a 2017, this video has you covered too. Before you guys jump into your installation and follow me along, I do want you to go ahead and take a look at the instruction sheet that Yoshimura has sent you. Familiarize yourself with the steps, kind of figure out where stuff is going to go, but the most important part is to check the bill of materials before you jump into this. Make sure everything is there. We wouldn't want you guys to get into this installation halfway through, realize that you're missing a bolt or a bracket, and then you guys have your bike in pieces and you don't have your exhaust on. Don't want that to happen. So definitely make sure that you have all the kit contents there before jumping into this installation. I have gone ahead and done that with my contents and I'm good to go. Let's jump right in. All right, guys, so I've gone ahead and gotten out some tools just to make this process a little bit quicker for us. I'll call them out as I go along. I'm not gonna go ahead and list them right now, but you should be able to follow along as I go through this. So the very first thing we wanna do is pick up our crescent wrench, the adjustable one, and we're going to adjust that to the right size of this O2 sensor. We're going to try and break that loose. Yours might take a little bit more. We have actually recently taken this off, so that was pretty easy. We just want to loosen that while the exhaust is still on. Then we're actually going to come up to where that plugs in, but before we do that, we actually have to take this out of the clips that route it. So now that we have our O2 sensor wire out, we're actually going to come up to the main clip. I'm going to remove this little weather shielding here to reveal the clip that actually holds it onto the case cover. So we're going to lift up on that, disengage the clip, and pull those connections out. There's a very small tab in here, and you'll notice that if you lift that tab up and pull out simultaneously, that little plug will disconnect. Thus our O2 sensor is disconnected, and we can go ahead and remove that entirely. We are going to save this guy because your bike will not function properly if we do not put that in the full system once we have that installed. Now exhaust work is a little bit dirty. I want to keep my hands a little bit clean, so now that I've done that little delicate bit of removing that clip, I'm going to put some gloves on. And then our next step is going to be going up to the OEM headers and starting to crack loose some of those header nuts. We're going to use an extension, smaller extension, with a 12mm socket. So similarly to the O2 sensor, I have actually gone through and cracked some of this stuff loose ahead of time, since we have taken this exhaust off and put it back on a number of times. So you guys might actually have a little bit more trouble with this step, but just give them a good crank. You should be able to break them loose. They do seize up over time with the heat and a little bit of rust. So I just want to make sure that you guys don't give up at that part. Now for these last three, I'm going to jump to the other side. I would suggest you do the same. A little bit difficult to see in here. There we go. And then the third one. All right, guys, so in this next portion of this installation, we're gonna go ahead and loosen up the bolts that are actually holding the cat up to the rear part of the frame. Now, I've just gone through and actually loosened these things up. I haven't actually removed any hardware yet, and that's because we want to get it loose enough to where we can take this stuff off by hand as opposed to using tools, and just unbolt everything by hand and remove the exhaust all at once. So I put on my longer extension here. You do have to get past this rear set here, so I do suggest having that longer extension. We're gonna go right in there. Now that that one's good and loose, we're gonna do the same on the other side. There is a symmetric bolt on the other side in the exact same place. We'll still need the extension. We still need to go through the rear set. It's an identical copy to the other side, just reversed. So in this next part, we're going to come up back to the headers. We're going to actually remove fully those nuts that we had loosened earlier. Now just using, all I need is the socket and the extension, because I've loosened them enough to where I could just turn these off by hand. So that's what I'm gonna do. All right, so now that that last header nut is off, we're actually gonna wanna take these nuts and set them off to the side because we will be reusing those. Those were the only things that were actually holding this header on, so we can start to wiggle it loose a little bit. It will be pretty seized up in there as this is the OEM. Give it a little wiggle. It should start to break free. Make sure that these flanges come back down. Everything's free up in there. There you go. And there goes my gaskets. Those don't always fall out, but they did in this case. We will be reusing those, so we do want to keep track of those. I'll set them off to the side until we're ready to put the other headers back on. But I do want to keep wiggling this a little bit. There we go. That's exactly what I wanted. So as you guys could see, the exhaust is actually now just teetering on those back bolts that I loosened earlier. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna go to the other side, remove that bolt entirely, and then come back to this one, the very last one that will be holding the stock exhaust. Once you remove that, this thing will drop down and we'll ditch it. So while I'm back here, I am actually gonna be supporting these headers so that they don't drop or hit anything, damage anything. One bolt. Gonna put our headers in a position that they won't fall. All right, so now that we've removed that bolt on the other side, we're gonna come back to the bolt on this side, which is the symmetric opposite of that one. And we're gonna hold up the exhaust since the headers are still free floating. And we're gonna remove this one entirely. That's the last bolt that's holding our exhaust. We're gonna be able to take this thing off and ditch it for the new one in a second here. So that was the very last bolt holding our exhaust up. As you'll see, it'll drop right down. I want to let the cat down first, then pull the headers over your radiator hoses. Remove that, and there you go. That's the stock can. So with that stock exhaust off and off to the side, we are on our way to a better sounding, better performing, and better looking motorcycle. We're going to start the installation of the Yoshimura system with the headers. We're just gonna get them up there, hand tighten them down, start working on the other system, and then go back through and torque everything down. I wanna start by replacing those gaskets that came out when I took the OEM exhaust off. Yours might not have fallen out, mine did. I just wanna get them back up in there before I put the Yosh headers on. All right, so with our gaskets in, we can go ahead and take our headers. We're gonna kind of mount them up via hand and then take our brackets, slip them over the bolts, and take a nut, put that on behind it. We're gonna do one at a time down the line, 1, 2, 3. First one is on, hand tighten down, grab our next two nuts, slide that bracket up. All right, so I started that process by just really getting the first few threads started. I'm now gonna go back down the line and really kind of sure things up. I'm still not gonna use any tools here. I don't wanna torque anything down. We do still want a little bit of that adjustability just so that when we slip on the mid pipe and the actual muffler itself, we can play around with it a little bit, make sure that we get our mounting points right. But let's go ahead and tighten these up a little bit more just so that they're not flopping around so much. All right, so on this next step, we're gonna come back to the little bit more rear of the motorcycle. There is one more component that was on the OEM setup that we're actually not gonna need, and while we're back here, we're going to remove. That is gonna be this guy here, a little T-washer. Now that is what held that bolt that went into your cat. We're not gonna be using that left side mount for anything anymore, so we are gonna wanna remove this guy so that it doesn't vibrate out and fling back into your drivetrain, fling up into a car, into your buddy's face, anything like that. We just want to take it out ahead of time, make sure nothing like that happens. So we're going to take that out, set it off to the side. We don't need it anymore. While we are back here, we are going to do the installation of this here tailpipe hanger. And we're going to do that by first loosening two Allen head bolts on the bottom of your oil pan. These two mounting bolts will take an M5 socket head. So we're gonna slip that in there and break these guys loose. All right, now that those bolts are loose, I'm gonna go ahead and remove them entirely. Keep these guys nearby because we're gonna reuse them right now. So we're gonna take this bracket. You can see that it only mounts up to those holes one way, being that the hanger is down. You could mount it up the other way, but that hanger is not supposed to be up there, so don't do that. So with the hanger down, we're gonna take a bolt, stick it up in there, and then hand thread that guy in. Do the same for that other mounting point. And at this step, we are actually going to torque these down because we'll be mounting things up to that, which will make it a little bit harder to get to later. So I'm gonna grab my torque wrench and torque these guys down to 7.2 foot-pounds or 10 Newton meters, and that is by Yamaha's suggested maintenance manual. So with torque wrench in hand, already set to 10 Newton meters, I'm gonna get up in there. Make sure I'm tightening. I'm gonna wait for that click. And then the same on this other guy here. All right, those guys are torqued down. We're cool to proceed to the next step. All right guys, so for this next step, it's gonna be a little bit difficult to see because I am gonna be working behind the rear set, but I'm gonna try and make it as clear to you as possible ahead of time. This is the actual bracket for the exhaust can itself. We're gonna have the M10 with the button head in this hole. That's the M10 by 40. Then we're gonna take the M8 by 40, drop it through that hole. We're gonna come up into the bike and drop those through the two mounting holes that are there to accept that geometry. We're gonna take our 10mm nut, hand thread that onto the back of our 10mm socket head. Do the same for our M8. And there you have it. That bracket's installed. We'll torque that down in a little bit. We could go ahead and move on to the next step before we do that though. All right guys, so now that we have the bracket on there and it's hand threaded, again, similar to this area, we are gonna be mounting stuff up to that. So I would actually like to go ahead and torque that down ahead of time. We're gonna do 20 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds, depending on what your torque wrench actually says. Those are equivalent values. And that is actually what is suggested by Yoshimura and suggested by Yamaha. So let's go ahead and do that. I have a 8mm Allen head for the 10mm Allen socket bolt, and then I'm gonna use my trusty 12mm socket to go ahead and tighten down that other bolt, both using a crescent wrench on the back. One, switch to the 12mm socket. There we go, got the click, and that bracket is torqued on. All right guys, so for this next part, we're gonna actually have to take this, this heat shield and put that on the exhaust hanger. That's gonna protect your stainless steel canister or carbon fiber if that's what you chose. It's gonna protect that from getting scratched because this hanger is metal. A little bit cumbersome to put on. I tend to just roll it on, try and get those little edges to pop up over that sidewall there. Now you will notice they actually have recesses. I should have called this out before I started that process, but they actually have recesses in them that match up with the ones on the exhaust. So you are going to want to match up that short side to the side that has a little bit less material on the top. So match that up, get those slots in the correct location, and start to feed that little ledge onto this bracket. Set that guy off to the side, and then we're gonna actually move to our canister and our mid-pipe. We're gonna do a little sub-assembly of that before we actually mount that up to the rest of the system. So I do wanna note this, this mid-pipe here kind of could go either way if you don't really know what you're doing. You do want to make sure that your hanger for this mid-pipe is actually towards the rear of the motorcycle, because that is going to mount up to that bracket that we installed earlier. So we're just going to slip this guy in here, kind of trying to make sure that the locations for our springs are going to kind of meet up a little bit. This stuff is all going to be able to move around once we get that up in there. All right guys, so we're going to take our exhaust hanger and actually slide that over our main unit here. I like to go ahead and pinch this together, kind of get it to where I think it might sit. And once I have that pinched together, I'm going to go ahead and throw my M8x20 on there. And then I'm going to keep that pinched while bringing my mid-pipe up to my headers and starting to slide that on. Now the reason that I kept that pinched is because I'm going to take this bolt and drop that through that bracket that we mounted earlier. Now it is telling me that I need to go a little bit further into the bike, so I may have to pull that out actually. Yeah, there we go. Drop it through once again. So now that we have that guy there, just want to go ahead and make that captive by pressing it all the way in. Got an awkward angle to deal with here, so what I'm going to try and do is use these needle nose to push that bolt in a tiny bit more so I can start to get some threads on the other side, which I have done. Perfect. All right, so now that that guy's slightly captive, we can start to move some other stuff around. We're gonna wanna take another piece of hardware that came in the kit, your M8x16, and you're gonna wanna take that and mount your tailpipe to that tailpipe hanger that we had mounted earlier. Now you're gonna wanna make sure that your bracket on the exhaust is actually out closer to you and not on the other side of that bracket, as that would cause a twisting moment in this full system. So we're going to take that bolt, reposition ourselves slightly. There we go. Hand thread on that M8 nut and tighten it down a little bit. So I've gone ahead and grabbed my socket again now that those are all hand tightened on there. I'll grab my socket and my crescent again. We're gonna actually go ahead and tighten these down and torque them down, because we're getting pretty close to being done with this installation. Just a few more steps and we're good to ride. So I'm going to start with the tailpipe hanger. Put the 12 on the back. Whoops. Don't want to be loosening that guy. There we go. Just go until pretty decently tight. We're going to actually torque that down here in a second. So you could just go till whenever you're comfortable with switching over to your torque wrench. I'm going to do that for both of these, the tailpipe hanger and the muffler hanger. Just about until bottom out. And then we're going to go ahead and swap over to our torque wrench. And on this guy, we will be using 20 Newton meters again, or 14 foot-pounds, depending on what you have, what your torque wrench reads in. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my crescent, throw that on the back of the tailpipe hanger. We're waiting for that click. There's one. Come back up to this guy, our actual muffler mount. Maybe switch to the box end of this wrench. Might be a little bit easier. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Very small amounts of movement, but I can actually get this thing torqued down. And there we go. All right, so that portion of the exhaust is torqued down. We're gonna go ahead onto our next step, which will be actually grabbing that O2 sensor and replacing that in here, wiring that back up. And then our very last step is gonna be moving up to the headers, torquing those guys down, and that will complete our installation. All right, guys, I grabbed my O2 sensor from my original exhaust. Just gonna go ahead and hand thread that in, crank it down with the crescent wrench, and then we're gonna go ahead and reroute our wires, plug that back in, and move on to the next step. Definitely want to make sure that we do this while the wire is disconnected. As you can see, that harness just twirled quite a bit in my hands. You don't want all those wraps in those wires. Those will cause stress on your plug and actually down by the sensor. So you do want to make sure you do that while it's all unattached. Grab our crescent, set it back to the right size again. Give that guy a little turn till it bottoms out, and then a half turn more. That's about it. Not even a full half turn, actually, just a little crank after it bottoms out. That's all it'll take. Then we're gonna take our wire, route it up through this cable routing area that we have. Make sure that the sheath is seated down on the sensor. Wire up through, underneath the rear set a tiny bit. There's a little knob there that kind of keeps that wire captive. Then back up to our main plug. We're gonna match up the locking feature with the accepting feature on the plug. Actually, before I plug that in, I'd like to put this back on the motorcycle because that's a little bit more cumbersome. So I'm gonna move that shield back, exposing this locking feature here that will actually go onto this clip here. So we're gonna finagle that into place. Drop that guy down, bring that little weather boot back down around it. Can be a little bit difficult sometimes. I have a flat head here to help me get that guy seated properly. Perfect. Now that I have that in place, I can go ahead and take this locking feature, face it towards the back, and feed that plug back up into that harness. All right, so our O2 sensor is successfully reinstalled. Let's go up to the headers, torque those guys down, and let's hear this thing roar. So this next portion, I've gone ahead and grabbed my ratchet again with my 12mm socket, and we're going to actually go back through on these header nuts and tighten those down till bottom out. As you'll recall, we just kind of hand threaded them on. I didn't go all the way down. So let's go ahead and do that before we switch over to our torque wrench, torque these guys down, and start this thing up. Now you don't want to do one side more than the other, so you do want to go back and forth, making sure that that ring is actually seating level, because you could seat it actually kind of diagonally and get one to bottom out and then the other one will bind, thinking that you've actually mounted that correctly, but you do want to make sure those are as flush as possible. As you'll notice, I have done one header at a time, going back and forth between the two nuts, just to make sure that that mounting plate does get seated properly. All right guys, so now that those are all bottomed out, we're gonna switch back to our torque wrench here, throw our 12mm socket on it, and make sure that we're still set to 20 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds. Still should be if you hadn't, reset that from doing the previous two steps. We're gonna go ahead and actually torque down each header one by one. Waiting for those clicks each time. Perfect, gonna move to the other side for the next three. All right, guys, check that out. That's an installation complete. Let's go ahead and walk through our final steps before starting this thing up. All right, so I know if you guys are anything like me, you probably finished torquing that last nut and you want it to jump straight to that ignition. Please don't. Grab some denatured alcohol or something of that sort and wipe down your exhaust. You got a lot of fingerprints and maybe a little bit of grease on there. You don't want to burn that onto the exhaust the very first time that you run that thing and it goes through its first heat cycle. So we're gonna go ahead and wipe that down before we start. Then we have one very last step and then we get to hear this thing. All right guys, so now that that's wiped down, we're gonna go ahead and finish up our very last few things here. We're gonna grab our springs and the spring puller, line one end up with either side. We're gonna start with the mid pipe and you're gonna put your spring puller, the hook, on the other side of the spring. You're gonna go ahead and pull back and get that thing hooked in. There's one on the opposite side. I'm gonna run around and do that guy, and then I'm gonna come back. There's actually two on the opposite side, one back here, and then I'm gonna do that one, and come back, finish this one here. This one's a little bit tricky because you do actually have to work around your oil pan and where it drains out of, but you should be able to get it. Do the one on the back side of the muffler. Grab our last one, come around here. See that very last one by both of the hangers, the mid-pipe hanger and the actual muffler hanger. This is probably gonna be one of the most difficult ones to get, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna set it on the muffler on this side, go around the other side, hook it, and then pull it back down towards the other portion of that hanger. And just like that. Perfect. Before I start this up, I'm gonna go ahead and do a bounce test. Just being that this is an under swing arm mounted exhaust, I wanna make sure that the swing arm's not gonna hit it, or that the rear set for some reason isn't gonna hit it. I'm gonna check my brake function, all that sort of stuff, because if I do have to move some stuff around, I'd like to do that while the exhaust is still cold, as opposed to a very hot exhaust, and I'd have to wait for it to cool off before I adjusted some stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and check my brake lever. Awesome, although very close, I'm not actually hitting the canister. And then I'm gonna come back here. Quick bounce test, everything checks out. All right, let's hear this thing roar. I don't even know how much I have to say. If you guys could hear that thing in person, you would know exactly why I'm kind of at a loss for words. This exhaust is incredible. This installation is complete all at once. With this exhaust system, we have saved weight. We've made much better sound, in my personal opinion. probably a bit more horsepower. We don't have an exact figure. You might want to get a tune with that, and with a tune on a full system, you'll make a good bit more horsepower than stock. But if that's not what you're going for, you don't necessarily have to do that. And then the last thing we did with this is we kind of reawakened the look of this motorcycle. That stock exhaust was very bulky and kind of bulbous underneath there, and it was very attractive and almost an eyesore. We've now streamlined the bottom of this motorcycle. We have this beautiful can with that carbon fiber tip coming out of the side. I really can't give Yoshimura enough praise, guys. I love what they do, and I think you will too if you pick one up. If you do like this exhaust and you do want to pick one up, go to our website at tstindustries.com. And if you like this video, found it helpful, or just like watching dudes work on bikes, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give this video a like if it was helpful, or if you just enjoyed hearing this bike. Thanks for watching, guys. Get out there and ride.
Mm-hmm.